Do you believe that a mother's greatest pain isn't watching her child pass away, but realizing she never truly knew who her child was at all? After her son's funeral, while the house was still cold with the scent of lilies, Althea found it. Not a letter, not a keepsake, but proof of a second life her son had lived in secret, a house that not even his own wife knew existed. In the moment she held that cold set of keys, her grief of losing a son transformed into a painful, gnawing suspicion. She decided to do the unthinkable. She hid the house from her daughter-in-law. This wasn't an act of greed, but the desperate journey of a broken heart, trying to piece together the fragments of a truth her son had tried so hard to bury. If you discovered that the person you loved most was a stranger, would you dare to search for the truth, even knowing it could destroy every beautiful memory you ever had? The Weight of Keys. My name is Dr. Althea William. I am 68 years old, and a week after burying my only son, Marcus, I am standing in front of a secret he kept from the world. A secret I now keep from his wife. The air here in Inman Park is thick with the sweet smell of jasmine and damp Georgia soil. It is a young neighborhood, full of laughter from the patios nearby, the gentle hum of lives moving forward, the kind of life Marcus should still be living. I look up at the dark wood of the apartment door, number 3B. It looks like any other door, solid, anonymous. But for me, it feels like the entrance to a tomb. In the palm of my hand, I hold a small, cold weight. The keys, I found them yesterday, tucked inside his old, worn copy of Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man, a book I gave him for his 21st birthday. The inscription on the first page now faded. To my brilliant son, may you always be seen. Love. Mom. I was packing away the small library of books he kept at my house, the ones he loved too much to leave behind completely. My fingers, dry and papery with age, brushed against a folded piece of notepaper. It was yellowed at the creases. On it, in his familiar, sharp architectural scrawl, was this address. Nothing else. Just an address. And a set of 2 keys taped to the paper with a brittle piece of Scotch tape. Keys I had never seen before, to a place I never knew existed. My first thought was a sharp, cold fear, the kind that cuts right through the heavy fog of grief. A woman, another woman. The thought was immediate, a reflex, but it didn't feel right. It wasn't my Marcus, not the boy I raised to value honesty above all else, not the man who called me every Sunday, without fail. But I am a sociologist by trade, retired now. But the habit of observation never truly leaves you. It becomes a part of how you see the world. You observe, you analyze, you look for the patterns in human behavior, the subtle cracks in the facade. And, at my son's funeral, the patterns were all wrong. The memory is so clear. It feels like it's happening right now. I close my eyes, and I am back in that church. I can smell the cloying sweetness of the white lilies, so many of them, suffocating the air with their perfume of death. I can feel the hard, unforgiving wood of the pew against my back, a dull ache that seemed to mirror the one in my chest. And I can still see Kimberly, my daughter-in-law. She was the perfect picture of a grieving widow, dressed in a simple, elegant black dress that must have cost a fortune. Her face, usually so vibrant and perfectly curated for her thousands of followers online, was pale and tear-streaked. She held a delicate lace handkerchief to her eyes. She leaned heavily on her friends. A fragile figure of sorrow. She performed her grief beautifully, a terrible thing to think. I know. But as a sociologist, I've spent a lifetime studying performance, and this was a masterclass. I watched her, through the blur of my own unshed tears. I watched, when she thought no one was looking, when the pastor was speaking of eternal rest. Her eyes weren't red and swollen with sorrow. They were scanning, assessing, moving across the crowd of mourners like a hostess checking on her guests, noting who was there, who was important. Later, at the reception held at the house they shared, our house, the one I helped them buy, I stood in the kitchen, needing a moment away from the hushed voices and the sad, pitying eyes. The house felt cold, full of expensive, minimalist furniture, but empty of warmth, empty of Marcus. That's when I heard her. Kimberly, speaking to her closest friend in a corner of the dining room, their heads bent together like conspirators. Her voice was a low, urgent whisper, not the broken whisper of a widow, the relieved whisper of a survivor. "I feel terrible saying this," she began. And her friend shushed her gently, but she continued. "But at least now, I can finally breathe." A pause, a sharp, audible intake of breath. The pressure is gone, gone. The word hung in the air between us. An invisible wall. It settled in my chest like a block of ice. Pressure? What pressure? The pressure of caring for a husband who loved her. The pressure of a beautiful life that so many envied. Or the pressure of a lie. That one word, gone, is why I am standing here now. It's why I didn't tell her when I found these keys. It's why my hand, a hand that has held my son through fevers and scraped knees and graduation days, is trembling as I push the first key into the lock of apartment 3B. The lock turns with a quiet, oily click, the sound of a secret opening up. I push the door. It swings inward, into the darkness. A stale, silent air rushes out to meet me, and I step across the threshold, into the life my son kept hidden from me. The perfect facade. The air inside the apartment is stale, unmoving. It's the smell of a place where no one has truly lived, just existed. I flick a switch by the door, and a single, bare bulb overhead buzzes to life, casting long, distorted shadows across the room. My first feeling is relief, a strange, hollow relief. There is no sign of another woman, no lingering scent of perfume, no feminine trinkets on a dusty shelf. The apartment is sparse, almost monastic. A small sofa sits against one wall, its cushions flat and unwelcoming. A cheap coffee table holds a single, empty mug stained with the ghost of old coffee, and in the center of the room, dominating the space, is a large, functional desk. This wasn't a love nest. This was a hiding place, a bunker. Against the far wall, a large whiteboard is mounted. It's covered in a chaotic web of diagrams, flowcharts, and business plans. Most of them are crossed out with thick, angry strokes of a red marker. Words like Phase 2 funding and user acquisition strategy are crossed out with such force that the marker has bled through the plastic surface. It is a map of failure, a testament to dreams that died right here, in this silent room. I run my fingers along the edge of the desk. A fine layer of dust coats everything. On a corner of the desk, there is a small, neat pile of mail. My heart begins to beat a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I pick up the first envelope. It's from a law firm I don't recognize. The window on the front shows Marcus's name. My fingers tremble as I tear it open. Final notice. The words are cold, impersonal. It's a letter demanding repayment of a seed investment, a loan for a startup company I barely knew anything about. Marcus had been so vague, calling it a passion project. The number on the page makes me feel dizzy, a number with 5 zeros after it. I drop the letter as if it has burned my hand. I pick up the next envelope, and the next. They are all the same, different names, different law firms, but the same story, a story of debt, of promises broken, of a venture that had not just failed, but had collapsed, dragging my son down with it. Then I see it, his old laptop, sitting closed on the desk like a silent black tombstone. I sit down in the worn office chair. It groans under my weight. I lift the lid of the laptop. The screen flickers to life, asking for a password. For a moment, I am stumped. What secret word would he use to guard this place? I try his birthday. Nothing. Kimberly's birthday. Nothing. Then, a memory surfaces. A scruffy terrier mix we had when he was a boy. A dog named Rusty. I type the letters R-U-S-T-Y. The screen unlocks. The desktop is clean. Organized. Too organized. There are only a few folders. One is labeled Work. Another, Finances. And then there is a third, labeled simply Kim, Lifestyle. My breath catches in my throat. I click on it. The folder opens to reveal a dozen spreadsheets. I click on the first one. It's a budget, a meticulously detailed log of expenses. But the categories aren't groceries or utilities. They are wardrobe, travel, events, automotive, and next to each category, in a neat column, is another label, brand expense. I see a $5,000 charge for a handbag. Brand expense. A $10,000 charge for a weekend trip to Napa Valley. Brand expense. The lease payments on a luxury SUV I thought they could barely afford. Brand expense. It is a ledger of a life built for an audience. A life lived through a camera lens. Paid for by a dream that was dying. My hands are shaking now. I feel a cold anger begin to snake its way around the ice block in my chest. This was her world. The world of perfect pictures and sponsored posts. A world she had dragged my son into. Or had he walked into it willingly? I close the spreadsheet and go back to his email. I find a conversation from 3 months ago. The subject line is Bali trip. I click it open. The first email is from Marcus. His words are tight. Clipped, Kim, we can't afford the trip to Bali. The investors are pulling out. We need to cut back. Immediately. I read it twice. He knew. He was trying to stop it. A small, desperate flicker of hope ignites in me. He was a victim. But then I see her reply. Sent just minutes later, Marcus. We have to. I've already promised a collaboration post with the resort. It's for our brand. This is my job. You have to find a way. You have to find a way. The words are a command, not a request. I hold my breath, my eyes scanning for his response. Praying he would say no, praying he would finally put his foot down. His reply is at the bottom, just 5 words, sent an hour later. An hour he must have spent in this very chair, staring at that whiteboard of failures. An hour of quiet desperation. Okay, I'll figure it out, okay? The word is a surrender. A defeat. And in that moment, the perfect image I had held of my son for 42 years begins to crack. He wasn't just a victim, he was a volunteer. He had known the cost of the perfect facade, and he had agreed to pay it. He chose to maintain the lie. And I, his mother, who thought I knew everything about him, I had seen nothing at all. I had only seen the beautiful pictures they posted, the smiling faces, the perfect facade, just like everyone else. The inheritance of lies. 2 days later, I sat in a leather chair that was too deep and too soft. The air in the lawyer's office smelled of old paper and lemon polish. It was a quiet, respectable place. A place where family tragedies were neatly filed away in manila folders. Kimberly sat across from me, next to the lawyer, Mr. Davies. She was wearing a cream-colored cashmere sweater. She looked pale, but composed. The picture of quiet dignity. Mr. Davies cleared his throat and began to read from the will. The legal language washed over me. Last will and testament. Of sound mind and body. Executor of my estate. The words were a sterile buffer against the raw flash. Gaping hole of my grief. The terms were simple, predictable. The house, their primary residence, went to Kimberly. The cars, the joint bank accounts, the majority of his stock portfolio, all to Kimberly. To me, his mother. Marcus left a sum of money, a generous amount, enough to ensure my comfort. He had written, and his personal effects, his books, his photographs, his father's old watch, the things that held memories, not monetary value. When Mr. Davies finished, there was a long silence. I just sat there, my hands folded in my lap, the keys to the secret apartment feeling like 2 small, cold stones in my coat pocket. Kimberly was the first to speak. She reached across the polished mahogany table and placed her hand gently on mine. Her skin was cool. Her nails were perfectly manicured. Of course, Althea, she said, her voice soft with practiced sympathy. Please take anything you want from the house to remember him by. Anything at all. I looked at her hand on mine. I thought of the spreadsheets, the handbags, the trips, the brand expenses. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning in the room. I slowly pulled my hand away. Thank you, Kimberly, I said. My voice sounded flat, distant. That's very kind. We gathered our things. Mr. Davies gave us both a sad, professional smile. As we were walking out of the conference room, into the quiet hallway. Kimberly slowed her pace to walk beside me. She looped her arm through mine. A familiar gesture that now felt like a cage. "It's all just so final," she sighed, leaning her head on my shoulder for a brief moment. I stood rigid. Then she straightened up. Her tone shifted, became lighter, brighter, almost casual. "You know," she said, looking at a painting of a ship on the wall, "Marcus never mentioned any other properties. Did he? Like a small investment condo or something. He was always so quiet about his finances." And there it was. The question. It wasn't an emotional question. It was a probe. A fisherman casting a line into dark water, hoping for a bite. My heart gave a single, hard thump against my ribs. The air in the hallway suddenly felt thin. I thought of the apartment, the whiteboard of failures, the emails of surrender, the part of my son he had hidden from her, from me, from everyone. The only part of him that was left that felt truly his. I turned to face her. I looked directly into her wide, hazel eyes. Eyes that, just a moment ago, were feigning sadness. Now, they were sharp, inquisitive, calculating. A lie formed on my lips. It was a small lie, but it felt heavy, monumental. It was the first one I had ever told about my son. "No," I said. My voice was steady, colder than I intended. "Nothing at all." I watched her face. A flicker of something passed through her eyes. Disappointment, suspicion. It was gone in an instant, replaced again by that soft, sad smile. "Oh, of course," she said, squeezing my arm. Silly of me to even ask. "Well, I should get going. So many thank you cards to write." She kissed my cheek. Her perfume was expensive, floral, but with a sharp, chemical note underneath. Then she turned and walked away, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor. I stood there for a long time, watching her go. She was not just grieving, she was inventorying. She was not just mourning a husband, she was calculating an estate. And she suspected there was more. She was smart. I had to give her that. And in that moment, as I stood alone in that quiet, polished hallway, my decision solidified. It was no longer a vague, protective instinct. It was a mission. Hiding that apartment was no longer just about preserving a secret. It was about preserving the last piece of my son's broken soul from the woman who had helped to break it. And right then as I looked at her retreating back, I knew this wasn't just about protecting an asset. This was the final battle for my son's honor. I have to ask, if you were in my shoes, what would you do? Would you choose the clean, simple truth? Or would you protect the memory of the person you loved at any cost? Let me know what you think in the comments below. I truly want to hear your stories. Invisible Man. In the weeks that followed, the secret apartment became my sanctuary. A strange word for a place born of lies. I know, but it was the only place that felt real. My own home was haunted by the son I thought I knew. Their house, Kimberly's house, was a cold stage set, but this small, dusty apartment, this was the truth. I started spending my afternoons there. I would bring a thermos of coffee and just sit in the quiet. I bought a few cleaning supplies, not to erase Marcus, but to care for his space. Wiping the dust from his desk felt like stroking his brow. Organizing the papers felt like trying to bring order to his chaotic thoughts. It was a strange, sad form of mothering, the only kind I had left. One afternoon, in a closet I hadn't opened, I found a cardboard box. It was sealed with old tape. On the side, in his teenage handwriting, was one word: stuff. I smiled for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. That was him. So wonderfully simple. I slit the tape with my thumbnail and opened the box. It was a time capsule. Inside were his old report cards, mostly straight A's. A few faded photographs of him and his high school friends. All goofy smiles and bad haircuts. There were crayon drawings from elementary school, of our family, of our old dog Rusty. My heart ached with a sweet, familiar love. This was my boy, my brilliant, happy boy. And then I found a thin folder. Inside were essays he had written for his high school English class, and tucked at the back, a poem I didn't even know he wrote poetry. The paper was thin, almost translucent with age. It was about wanting to be a jazz musician, about losing himself in the mournful sound of a saxophone in a smoky room. The words were clumsy, heartfelt, the yearning of a boy with a secret soul, and that's when the memory came. It rose up so suddenly, so vividly. It felt like I was back in my own kitchen, 25 years ago. Marcus was 17. He was sitting at the kitchen table, his long legs stretched out, his face lit up with a passion I hadn't seen before. He had just discovered John Coltrane. He was talking about applying to music school in New Orleans. His eyes were shining. I could really do it. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking with teenage excitement. I could be good. I remember I was stirring a pot of collard greens on the stove. I remember the smell of bacon fat and vinegar. I remember smiling at his enthusiasm. A gentle, loving smile, a mother's smile. And then I remember the words I said, the careful, sensible words that I thought were an act of love. "That's a wonderful hobby, son," I said, turning down the flame. "A real passion. But a degree in computer science from Georgia Tech, that's a future. That's security. Music can always be your hobby." I had said it with the best of intentions. To protect him, to give him the stable life his father and I had worked so hard to build. I saw his face fall. Just for a second, the light in his eyes dimmed. But then he smiled back at me. That good son smile of his. "You're right, Mom," he said. "Of course. You're right." He never mentioned music school again. Sitting on the floor of that dusty apartment, the memory hit me, not like a wave, but like a physical blow. The air left my lungs. That was the beginning, wasn't it? The first time I had gently, lovingly, steered him away from who he was, toward who I thought he should be. My eyes fell on the book that had started all of this. Invisible Man. It was sitting on the coffee table where I had left it. I picked it up. The cover was soft with wear. I opened it, and my gaze fell upon the inscription I had written all those years ago. "May you always be seen." What a bitter irony. I flipped through the pages. The same pages my son's hands had touched. And then I saw it. A single sentence, near the beginning of the book. It was underlined twice, in faint pencil, a sentence I had read before, but had never truly understood until this very moment. "I am invisible. Understand? Simply because people refuse to see me." I read the line again, and again. The words blurred through my tears. People, not just Kimberly, not just his investors or his clients. People, plural. And in that crushing, suffocating moment of clarity, I understood. I was one of them. I was one of the people who had refused to see him. I had seen the brilliant student. I had seen the successful software developer. I had seen the good son. But the boy who wanted to play saxophone in smoky rooms, the man who was crumbling under the weight of a life he never truly chose, I hadn't seen him at all. I had loved him completely. But I had not seen him fully, and the pressure Kimberly had talked about, it hadn't started with her. It had started long before. It had started in my own kitchen, with a pot of collard greens and the gentle, crushing weight of a mother's love. The pressure to be the perfect son had made him the perfect target for a wife who demanded the perfect life. I bowed my head, and the hard, righteous anger that had been my shield for weeks finally shattered, and underneath, there was only a vast, empty expanse of sorrow, and a shame so profound it felt like I could never stand up again. The smell of bleach. Guilt is a heavy coat. I wore it everywhere for days after my revelation in the apartment. It made my movements slow, my thoughts sluggish. The righteous anger I had felt toward Kimberly was gone, replaced by a dull, aching shame. I stopped going to the apartment. The place felt too honest, too raw. I stayed home, surrounded by the ghosts of my own mistakes. And then, on a Tuesday morning, the doorbell rang. It was Kimberly. She stood on my porch holding a canvas tote bag. She was wearing designer athletic wear, her hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. She looked like she had just come from a yoga class. "Althea," she said, her voice bright and cheerful. Too bright. "I was just in the neighborhood. I thought I'd stop by. See how you were doing. I brought some cleaning supplies. I know how overwhelming these things can be. I thought we could, tackle some of Marcus's old things together." Clean out the memories a little. She held up a bottle of bleach. A pair of yellow rubber gloves poked out of her bag. The smell of bleach? A clean, sterile smell. The smell of something being erased. My first instinct was to close the door. But I am a sociologist. I recognized the tactic. This wasn't an act of kindness. This was an infiltration. She was here to search the house. And if I turned her away, it would only confirm her suspicions. So I forced a tired smile. Kimberly. That's thoughtful of you. Come in. She stepped inside. Her eyes immediately scanning the room, the living room, the hallway, taking everything in. She was a hunter in my home. Let's start with his old office, she suggested, already moving toward the back of the house. That room has been cluttered for years. For the next hour, we worked in a tense, suffocating silence, broken only by Kimberly's cheerful, probing questions. She wiped down bookshelves that were already clean. She organized files that were already in order. And she asked, did Marcus keep any important papers here? Althea, for safekeeping, she asked, her voice echoing slightly as she scrubbed the inside of an empty filing cabinet. No, dear, I said, folding an old sweater of his. The wool felt soft against my skin. He kept everything at your house, or with the lawyer. Right, she murmured. A few minutes later, a new question. Did he ever have a safe deposit box at a bank? I can't seem to find a key for one. Not that I know of, I said. My voice even. My heart, however, was not. It was beating a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Each question was a little tap against the thin wall of my secret. I watched her move around the room. Her movements were efficient, thorough. She wasn't just cleaning. She was searching, looking for a stray bank statement, a hidden key, a clue. And then she found one. I had been careless. The day I came back from the apartment, after my breakdown, I hadn't been thinking clearly. It had been raining. My shoes had been muddy. Kimberly was running a vacuum cleaner near the back door that leads to the garden. She suddenly switched it off. The sudden silence was deafening. Althea, she said, her voice casual, too casual. What's this? I walked over. She was pointing the vacuum nozzle at a small, dried smudge of reddish-brown dirt on the edge of my beige area rug. It was the distinct red clay of Georgia, but it was darker, richer than the soil in my own yard. It was the soil from the planters outside the apartment building in Inman Park. Have you been anywhere lately? She asked, looking at the smudge, not at me. Looks like that clay they have out by the lakes. The moment froze. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen seemed to grow louder. My mind raced. She was testing me, setting a trap. This was her opening. The shame and guilt that had weighed me down for days suddenly evaporated. And in its place, a cold, sharp clarity returned. The sociologist, the observer, the mother protecting her child's last refuge. I gave a small, weary laugh. Oh, that, I said, waving a dismissive hand. That's just from the community garden down the street. My old knees aren't what they used to be. I probably stumbled. I watched her. I saw the muscles in her jaw tighten. Just for a second. She knew I was lying. And I knew that she knew, but she couldn't prove it. She forced a bright smile. Oh, of course, she said, switching the vacuum back on with a roar. You should be more careful. She finished her cleaning quickly after that. The pretense was over. She gave me a brief, cool hug at the door and left. I stood there, listening to the sound of her expensive SUV pulling away from the curb. The air in my house still smelled faintly of bleach. The game had changed. She was no longer just suspicious. She was hunting. And I was no longer just a grieving mother hiding a secret. I was her prey. I knew then, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I couldn't just hide anymore. I had to decide what my next move was going to be, before she made it for me. A stranger's kindness. Kimberly's visit left a residue of panic in my quiet house. The smell of bleach lingered for days. A sharp, chemical reminder that my secret was no longer safe. She was closing in. I could feel it. I spent the next 2 days in a state of low-grade fear, jumping every time the phone rang, peering out the blinds at every car that passed. I knew I couldn't just leave things as they were. The laptop, The box of papers. The letters from investors. They were a trail of breadcrumbs, leading straight to the truth. A truth I wasn't even sure I understood myself anymore. On Thursday afternoon, I made a decision. I had to go back. I had to clean the place out. Remove every trace of Marcus. Every piece of evidence. I would pack it all into boxes and store them in my attic, where no one would ever find them. I drove to the apartment with a sense of urgent dread. Every red light felt like a personal delay. Every slow driver, an obstacle. When I arrived, I worked quickly. My movements were frantic. I pulled the papers from the desk and shoved them into a sturdy cardboard box. The letters, the spreadsheets, the old poem about the saxophone player, all of it. I unplugged the laptop and wrapped the cord around it, placing it carefully on top. The box was heavy, heavier than it looked, heavy with the weight of a life lived in secret. I taped the box shut, my hands fumbling with the dispenser. My heart was pounding. I felt like a criminal, a thief stealing the last remnants of her own son. I struggled to lift the box. It was awkward and heavy. Digging into my hip, I shuffled toward the door, my back already aching. I pulled the door open and tried to maneuver the box through the doorway. It got stuck. I grunted with effort, pushing it, my frustration mounting, and that's when I heard a voice. A low, gravelly voice. "Need a hand with that." "Ma'am." I looked up, startled. Standing in the hallway was an old man. He was leaning against the doorframe of the apartment opposite. 3A. He was a black man, tall and thin, with a kind, wrinkled face and a cloud of white hair. He was holding a trumpet case in one hand. I must have looked a sight. A flustered old woman wrestling with a box outside a strange apartment. I'm fine. Thank you, I stammered, trying to regain my composure. He just smiled. A slow, gentle smile. "You look just like him." "You know," he said, his voice soft. "The eyes, you've got his eyes." I froze. "Him?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Marcus," he said, his smile turning sad. He was a good young man, a real gentleman. I was so sorry to hear he passed. "My name's George." He stepped forward and took the box from my hands as if it weighed nothing at all. "Let me help you with this," he said. He looked at the box, then back at me. He came here to think, to get away from the noise. Tears pricked my eyes. I was so tired of being alone with this secret. So tired of the lies. "You knew him?" I asked. "Oh, sure," George said, setting the box down gently in the hallway. He'd stop by my place sometimes, maybe once or twice a month. He heard me playing my horn one evening and knocked on the door. Said it reminded him of his granddaddy. I felt a pang in my chest. My own father, who had played the trumpet in smoky clubs all over Atlanta. We didn't talk much about whatever was going on out there, George said, gesturing vaguely toward the city. No talk of business or money. He'd just come in. I'd pour us both a little bourbon, and we'd listen to my old records. Coltrane, Miles Davis, the greats. He looked at me, his eyes full of a deep, knowing kindness. "Your boy had an old soul, ma'am," he said softly. He told me once. Sitting right there on my sofa. He said this apartment building, this was the only place he didn't have to pretend. The words hit me. The only place he didn't have to pretend. Not with me. Not in my home, where he had to be the perfect son. Not in his own home, where he had to be the perfect husband. Only here, with a stranger, listening to old music. The last time I saw him, George continued, his voice dropping lower. It was maybe a week before he passed. He looked tired, real tired, down to the bone. We sat for a while, not saying much. When he got up to leave, he stood at the door for a long time. Then he turned to me and said something that's been bothering me ever since. I held my breath. George looked down at his trumpet case, as if the memory was inside it. He said, "You know, George, sometimes I think the biggest lie I ever told was just saying I'm okay." I made a small sound, a wounded gasp, the sound of a mother's heart breaking all over again. The biggest lie I ever told was saying I'm okay. He had said it to me so many times. On the phone? Every Sunday. How are you? Son, I'd ask. And he'd always reply, I'm okay. Mom, everything's fine. It was a lie. A lie to protect me. A lie that had left him utterly, completely alone. I realized then that Marcus hadn't just been hiding his financial failures in this apartment. He had been hiding his entire self. He had been hiding his profound, crushing loneliness. I leaned against the doorframe, the strength gone from my legs. The box of secrets sat on the floor between us. But the real secret wasn't in the box. The real secret was the silence, the pretending, the terrible, lonely burden of being okay. And I, his mother, had been on the other side of that lie, never once thinking to look beneath the surface. The confrontation. George offered to help me carry the box down to my car, but I told him to leave it. I couldn't think about boxes or papers anymore. His words had hollowed me out, leaving me with a grief so profound it felt bottomless. I'm okay. Mom. The biggest lie he ever told. We said our goodbyes, and I watched him disappear back into his apartment, back to his music. I stood alone in the hallway, the silence pressing in on me. I turned to go back into Marcus's apartment, to just sit, to just be in the last place he had felt real. And that's when I saw her. She was standing at the end of the hallway, by the elevators. Kimberly. She was holding her phone up, as if she had just finished recording something. A small, triumphant smile played on her lips, the kind of smile a predator makes when it has finally cornered its prey. So this is it, she said, her voice echoing in the quiet hall. She walked toward me, her heels clicking a sharp, angry rhythm on the linoleum floor. The little secret. My blood ran cold. She must have followed me, waited, watched. I knew it, she said, stopping a few feet in front of me. She tucked her phone into her purse. I knew you were hiding something. All that talk about the community garden? What a joke. She peered past me, into the open door of the apartment. Her eyes were hard, calculating. What is this place? Althea, she demanded. Another asset you were trying to hide. Another piece of the pie you wanted all to yourself. You were trying to steal from me. Steal. The word was so ugly, so small. It was like trying to describe a hurricane with the word windy. The grief and shame inside me suddenly ignited, transformed by her accusation into a pure, cold rage. The trembling in my hands stopped. The fog in my mind cleared. I didn't answer her. Instead, I stepped back into the apartment. I pointed to the cheap, worn-out sofa against the wall, the sofa where my son had sat with a kind stranger, just to feel a moment of peace. Steal, I said. My voice was low, but it didn't shake. You think this place was about money? I turned to face her. All the pain, all the things I had swallowed down for weeks, finally came pouring out. This place was about a boy who couldn't breathe in the life you built for him, a life of brand expenses and collaboration posts, a life that looked so perfect on the outside but was rotting from the inside out with debt and lies. Kimberly flinched, her perfect composure finally cracking. That's not true, she shot back. Marcus wanted that life. He loved it. He was proud of our brand. Brand, I laughed. A harsh, ugly sound. You call this a brand? I kicked the cardboard box on the floor. Papers spilled out. The final notices. The loan defaults. The loan defaults. This is your brand. Kimberly, a pile of failures he was killing himself to hide. Did you ever once ask him if he was okay? A real okay. Not the one he performed for you. For me. For the whole world. Her face flushed with anger. She took a step forward, her finger jabbing the air. Don't you dare put this on me. He was a grown man. He made his own choices. If he was so miserable, why didn't he just say something? Because he spent his entire life trying to be the perfect son for me. And the perfect husband for you, I yelled, the words tearing from my throat. He was so afraid of disappointing us that he forgot how to be himself. He came here to listen to jazz with a stranger because it was the only place on earth he didn't have to pretend to be the successful Marcus Williams you were, selling to your followers. Tears were streaming down my face now. Hot, angry tears. Kimberly stared at me, her mouth slightly open. For the first time, I saw not a monster, but a panicked, defensive woman who had lost control of her own carefully crafted narrative. He's dead. Kimberly, I said, my voice dropping to a harsh, final whisper. The energy drained out of me, leaving only a vast, chilling emptiness. He is dead, and all you can see are dollar signs. Get out. She just stood there, speechless. Get out, I repeated, my voice like ice. Get out of my son's sanctuary. She stared at me for one long, hateful moment. Then, she turned on her heel and walked away, her footsteps echoing down the hall until they were gone. Angie was gone, water declining so, and I stood there, alone, in the middle of the scattered, broken pieces of the truth. The battle felt like it was over, but I felt more empty than I ever had before. If you are still listening, please help me by commenting with the word sanctuary below, so I know there are still friends walking with me on this journey. Your presence is the greatest encouragement for me to tell the final part of this story, with the hardest part, what to do when the storm has passed. An empty victory. After the confrontation, I expected something. A call from Kimberly. Maybe more yelling. A visit from her lawyer. With threats. But there was only silence. A deep, profound silence that felt louder than our shouting. I went home and did not return to the apartment for 3 days. I just sat in my quiet house. The anger had burned itself out, leaving behind only the fine, gray ash of exhaustion. I had won. I had spoken the truth, and she had fled from it. But it felt like no victory at all. It felt like I had simply ripped the bandages off a wound, leaving it exposed to the cold, empty air. On the 4th day, a letter arrived. It came via a courier. A crisp, white envelope, with the name of a prestigious law firm embossed in the corner. Her law firm. My hands were steady as I opened it. There was no emotion left in me to fuel any trembling. The letter was short, formal. It was a legal document, a settlement offer. It stated that Kimberly Vance would agree to relinquish any and all claims to the property at 3B Inman Park. She would also sign a non-disclosure agreement, promising to never speak of its existence or the circumstances of its discovery, in exchange for her silence and for a full and final settlement of the estate. She required a one-time payment. The amount she requested was, according to her lawyer's estimate, 25% of the apartment's market value. I put the letter down on my kitchen table. I sat there and stared at it for a long time. The afternoon sun slanted through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I had her. The contents of that laptop, the letters from the investors, it was enough. I could take her to court. I could prove financial malfeasance, perhaps even emotional abuse. I could expose the perfect life she had built as a hollow sham. I could ruin the brand she held so dear. I could drag her name through the mud and leave it there. The fight in me, the sociologist, the mother, it wanted to. It craved that final, public vindication. But as I sat there, in the silence of my kitchen, another thought began to surface. A quieter, heavier thought. And then what? What would happen after the court case? After the victory? Would it bring Marcus back? Would it erase the mistakes I had made? Would it heal the profound loneliness that had led him to that secret room? No, it would just be more noise, more performance, more pain. Dragged out for months, maybe years. It would keep me tied to her, to this ugly, tangled knot of secrets and lies. It would keep me frozen in this moment of anger, unable to move forward. Marcus was gone. He was not coming back. All this fighting, it wasn't for him. Not anymore. It was for me. For my anger, for my guilt, and that felt like the most selfish reason of all. I thought of what George had said. He came here to get away from the noise. A court battle was the loudest noise of all. I stood up. I walked over to my desk, took out my checkbook, and sat back down at the kitchen table. My pen hovered over the blank line. I thought of the 25%. It felt like a ransom. A final, parting tax on my son's secret life. But then I thought of it another way. I wasn't paying her to go away. I was paying for silence. Not her silence. Mine. I was paying for the right to let this story end. I was buying my own peace. A peace that Marcus had so desperately sought and never found. I wrote the check. My signature was firm, unwavering. I slid it into the return envelope provided by her lawyer. I sealed it without a second thought. It was over. The war was over. I had won. I suppose. I had kept the sanctuary. But as I sat there, the only thing I felt was the profound, aching emptiness of the price of peace. The sound of jazz. After the check was sent and the papers were signed, a new kind of silence fell. It wasn't the loud, tense silence of before. It was a quiet, empty silence. The silence of a chapter that has truly ended. For about a week, I did nothing. I drifted through my days, feeling untethered. The apartment was still there, officially mine now, free and clear, but I didn't know what to do with it. The thought of going back there felt heavy. The thought of selling it felt like a betrayal, so I baked a sweet potato pie. It's what I do when I don't know what else to do. I bake. The familiar ritual of measuring flour, of cracking eggs, of the warm scent of cinnamon and nutmeg filling my kitchen. It's grounding. When the pie was done, golden and fragrant, I knew where it had to go. I took it over to Inman Park, to apartment 3 Amperes. George opened the door, and his wrinkled face broke into that slow, kind smile. "Well now," he said, his eyes lighting up at the sight of the pie. "To what do I owe this honor, Dr. Williams?" "It's just Althea," I told him, "and it's just a thank you." He invited me in. His apartment was the complete opposite of Marcus's. It was filled with life. Stacks of records leaned against the walls. Photographs of musicians I recognized. Duke Ellington, Sarah Vaughan were tacked to a corkboard. His old trumpet lay gleaming on its stand in the corner. It was a home. I told him everything was settled, that the apartment was mine now. "So what will you do with it?" he asked, after taking a slow, appreciative bite of pie. "Sell it, I suppose." "I don't know," I admitted, my voice quiet. I thought about it. Maybe it's best to just let it go. Let the memories go with it. George took another bite of pie, chewing thoughtfully. He looked at me over the rim of his coffee mug. His eyes were clear and steady. "A place isn't just bricks and mortar, Althea," he said, his gravelly voice soft. "It's memory. Your boy found a little peace in that room over there, a quiet place in the middle of all the noise." He paused, setting his fork down. "Maybe that peace is worth sharing." Worth sharing. The words were simple, but they landed in my heart like a seed. I thought of the poem Marcus had written as a boy, the one about the smoky jazz club. I thought of his secret love for a music he was never allowed to pursue. The music his grandfather had played, the music that lived right here, across the hall. In this kind old man's home, an idea began to form. Not a grand plan, just a small, quiet feeling, a sense of purpose that I hadn't felt since before Marcus died. The next day, I didn't call a real estate agent. I called the music department at Georgia State University. I spoke to a woman there, the head of the jazz studies program. I told her I was a retired professor. I told her I had a small, furnished apartment near the campus. And I told her my idea. I proposed to turn the apartment into the Marcus Williams residency. A quiet place. A safe place. For one semester, it would be a home, free of charge, for a gifted jazz student who was struggling to make ends meet. A place where they could practice and compose. A place where they could focus on their art, without the pressure of the outside world. A place where they could breathe. The woman on the phone was silent for a moment. Then, her voice thick with emotion, she said it was the most beautiful offer she had heard in a long time. That afternoon, I went back to the apartment, but this time, I didn't go to hide or to grieve. I went to prepare. I opened the windows, letting the fresh air and the sounds of the city drift in. I cleaned the desk, not to erase Marcus, but to make space for someone new. I went to a music store and bought a small electric piano, placing it in the corner where the sofa used to be. I went to a bookstore and bought posters of the jazz greats Coltrane, Miles Davis, Ella Fitzgerald, and hung them on the pale, empty walls. With every small act, I felt a piece of myself coming back together. I was no longer just the guardian of a painful secret. I was becoming the keeper of a hopeful legacy. I was taking this space, once filled with the silence of my son's despair, and getting it ready for the sound of music. An Unwritten Song. The first day of the fall semester arrived with a cool, clean breeze that promised relief from the long, heavy heat of the Georgia summer. For the first time in months, I felt like I could take a full, deep breath. I stood in the hallway of the apartment building, the same hallway where I had once stood paralyzed by secrets. My heart, a cold stone of grief in my chest. This time, I was not hiding. This time, I was waiting. Soon, I heard the soft thud of footsteps on the stairs. A young woman appeared, struggling with a heavy keyboard case in one hand and a well-loved saxophone case in the other. A worn backpack was slung over her shoulder. She was thin, with bright, intelligent eyes that seemed to be taking in everything at once, carrying both the exhaustion of a long struggle and the fierce determination of an artist. This was Simone, the first recipient of the Marcus Williams residency, a brilliant musician, the university had told me, with a talent far bigger than her bank account. I stepped forward and reached for the backpack. Here, let me help you with that. It was heavier than it looked, weighted down with books and dreams. You must be Simone, I said, my voice warmer than I had heard it in a long time. I'm Althea. She gave me a shy, grateful smile that transformed her tired face. It's an honor to meet you, Dr. Williams, she said, her voice soft. I really can't thank you enough for this. It changes everything. There's no need, I said, turning the key in the lock of 3B. The click was no longer the sound of a secret, but of an invitation. Just make good music in here. I showed her around the small, clean apartment. It was the same space, but it was completely transformed. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the clean windows, making the dust motes dance. It glinted off the polished keys of the new piano in the corner and caught the glass on the framed posters lining the walls. It no longer felt like a tomb or a bunker. It felt like a blank page, a place of quiet possibility. When she saw the posters of John Coltrane and Ella Fitzgerald, her eyes widened, and a genuine, unforced wow escaped her lips. She walked over and gently touched the frame of the Coltrane photo. It's perfect, she breathed. As I prepared to leave her to settle in, she stood by the door, looking a little overwhelmed by the silence and the space. Your son, Marcus, she started, her voice hesitant. Afraid to overstep, she looked at the posters, then back at me. He must have really loved jazz. I looked at her. This young woman with her whole life ahead of her, a life she was trying to fill with music, and I gave her the truest, simplest, most painful and beautiful answer I could. He did, I said, a small, sad smile touching my lips. And I think my son would have loved to hear your music. I left her then, closing the door softly behind me, leaving her to her new beginning. I didn't go home right away. I crossed the street to the little park, the one with the old, sprawling oak trees, and I sat down on a bench that faced the apartment building. The sun was warm on my face. I didn't check the time. I just sat, and I waited for about an hour. But there was only the sound of the city around me, the distant traffic, the laughter of children playing nearby. I thought of Marcus. Are you watching? Son, are you listening? And then, I heard it, faintly at first. A single, questioning note from an open window on the third floor. Then a tentative scale, climbing and falling, like a bird testing its wings. It wasn't a rehearsed song. It was just notes. Improvisational, searching, a young musician getting to know the feel of a new room, the sound of her own soul echoing off the walls. The notes rose and fell, weaving a melody that was hesitant and hopeful all at once. A melody that was just beginning. I closed my eyes and listened. I didn't cry. For the first time in a very long time, I smiled. A real smile. A quiet smile, just for me, that came from a place deeper than my sorrow. In that moment, sitting on that park bench, I finally understood the lessons that this long, painful journey had taught me. I have learned the hardest lesson of being a parent. I see it so clearly now. Our love is not meant to be a mold, a hammer and chisel to shape our children into the image we desire. It is meant to be a safe space, a sanctuary, a quiet harbor where they can fail, where they can be afraid, and where they can be their own imperfect, beautiful selves. I didn't give Marcus that space when he was alive, but now, this small room, filled with music, will be that space for other young souls, and I wish, with every fiber of my being, that I could go back and tell that boy, my son, that a burden is made lighter when it is shared, that the silence we keep to protect the ones we love often builds the highest, coldest walls between us. If only he had known that a mother's arms are strong enough to hold both the brilliant successes and the devastating failures of her child. We live in a world of facades now, a world of perfect filters and carefully curated smiles. We build personal brands while our true selves sometimes starve within. My son got lost trying to maintain an image, trying to pay for a life that was never really his true legacy. And the true legacy of us all is not found in what we display to the world. It is found in the unwritten songs, the hidden truths, and the simple kindness we show each other when no one is watching. The sound of the saxophone drifted on the afternoon air, weaving through the leaves of the old oak trees, full of life. And I knew that my son's song, in its own quiet way, was finally being played. And with the final notes of jazz drifting through the Atlanta air, one story ends. But the world is full of hidden rooms and quiet secrets. Isn't it Althea found her son's? What secrets might be waiting in the lives all around us? What would you do if you were the one to find the key? Let that thought linger. And leave your own final word on Althea's story in the comments below. I'll be there, reading and listening. If you believe that every life holds a mystery worth telling, then join our community here at Deepu Cater Stories. Like this video to cast your vote for more stories like this. And subscribe so you're here when the next door creaks open. Until then, listen closely. You never know whose story you might hear.